Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born on February 20, 2005, in Palmdale, California, a city just north of Los Angeles. From the beginning, his life was surrounded by instability. His mother, Pearl Cynthia Fernandez, was known to have a violent temper, a history of drug use, and showed little capacity for nurturing. Shortly after Gabriel was born, Pearl gave him away to be raised by his great-uncle, Michael Lemos Carranza, and Michael's partner, David Martinez. In their home, Gabriel was safe. He was loved, cared for, and treated like a normal child. He thrived in that environment. But in 2012, everything changed. For reasons still unclear, and despite her documented history of neglect, Pearl decided she wanted Gabriel back. Shockingly, there was no formal investigation, no safety checks, and no legal hearing. Child welfare authorities allowed Pearl to take back custody of Gabriel without questioning her motives or evaluating the home environment she was offering. Pearl's boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre, a man who worked as a security guard and had no children of his own, moved in with them. What followed was the beginning of a horrifying descent into daily abuse. Within just a few weeks of moving in, Gabriel began showing visible signs of mistreatment. At school, his teacher, Jennifer Garcia, noticed bruises forming on his arms and face. He became withdrawn, quiet, and often looked scared. One day, in a moment that would haunt Jennifer forever, Gabriel asked her softly, "Is it normal for moms to hit their kids?" Alarmed, she pressed further and learned that Gabriel had been beaten with a belt and hit in the face. She immediately reported the abuse to the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. Over the next few months, Gabriel came to school with black eyes, burn marks, chunks of hair missing from his scalp, and open wounds on his legs and neck. The signs were clear, and they were getting worse. The school staff filed multiple reports with social workers and police. Gabriel told adults that his parents hit him, locked him up, and punished him unfairly. But no one acted decisively. Each time a report was made, it seemed to vanish into the bureaucracy. The social workers assigned to his case either downplayed the severity of the reports or claimed there wasn't enough evidence to remove him from the home. Meanwhile, Gabriel continued to suffer in silence. By late 2012 and into early 2013, Gabriel's condition had visibly deteriorated. He wore long sleeves to cover bruises, stopped participating in class, and began writing troubling notes, including one to his mother asking, "Can you love me?" Despite nearly a dozen documented reports, Pearl and Aguirre were never held accountable, and Gabriel was never removed from the home. What makes Gabriel's case so shocking isn't just the cruelty he endured, it's the fact that everyone around him knew something was wrong. His teacher, school administrators, his classmates, even extended family members, they all raised concerns. Yet no one in the system acted with the urgency his life demanded. The people paid to protect him turned away, and the warning signs were ignored. As Gabriel's pain deepened, so did the failures of those entrusted with his safety. This wasn't just a case of abuse, it was a complete collapse of a system designed to protect the most vulnerable. Behind the closed doors of that small Palmdale apartment, Gabriel Fernandez was subjected not merely to abuse, but to prolonged, systematic torture, the kind that defies belief and exposes the darkest depths of human cruelty. From the outside, the apartment looked ordinary, even quiet. But inside, it became a prison for an 8-year-old child whose only crime was wanting to be loved. Gabriel's torture wasn't spontaneous or reactionary. It was calculated, repeated, and escalated over time. Every single day, Gabriel was subjected to humiliating and brutal punishments. He was forced to sleep in a locked wooden cabinet in the bedroom, a small, suffocating box no child should ever be confined in. His ankles were sometimes bound with shoelaces, and his mouth gagged with socks to keep him from crying out. When he soiled himself, often due to extreme fear and malnutrition, Aguirre and Pearl would respond by beating him or forcing him to eat his own vomit or cat feces. Isauro Aguirre, Pearl's boyfriend, appeared to take sadistic pleasure in inflicting pain on Gabriel. He burned Gabriel with lit cigarettes. He beat him with a baseball bat, a belt buckle, and metal hangers. Aguirre shot Gabriel multiple times with a BB gun, aiming not at random but targeting areas like his groin, chest, and face. He called Gabriel gay and a faggot, mocking the little boy's gentle nature. As part of this twisted form of punishment, Gabriel was often made to wear girls' clothes to school, deliberately humiliated in front of his classmates. He was denied access to food and water, growing thinner and weaker as the weeks went on. Pearl Fernandez, Gabriel's own mother, did nothing to stop the horror. In fact, she participated in it. Rather than acting as a protector, she laughed at his pain, encouraged Aguirre's violence, and isolated Gabriel from any source of comfort or help. His two older siblings, who lived in the same apartment, later told investigators that they watched Gabriel be beaten and tortured daily. They heard his cries, saw the bruises, the blood, the broken skin. But they were children themselves, scared, helpless, and terrified of becoming the next target. Despite the ongoing abuse, Gabriel still clung to small hopes. At school, he found brief moments of safety and attempted to reach out for help. He once handed his teacher a note that read, "Can you help me?" On another day, he gave her a homemade valentine with a message saying, "I love you, because you are nice." His face would sometimes be swollen or bruised, and when asked what happened, he'd quietly whisper that he had fallen, a lie no one believed, but one he felt forced to repeat. His behavior grew more distant and withdrawn. The boy who once wanted to become a police officer and loved caring for animals was disappearing before everyone's eyes. Tragically, many people did notice. Gabriel's teacher, Jennifer Garcia, reported the abuse to the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, again and again. In fact, over a span of 8 months, multiple calls were made, not just by school staff, but also by concerned relatives and even neighbors who heard disturbing sounds coming from the apartment. Screams. Thuds. Cries for help. Still, nothing was done. 4 different social workers were assigned to Gabriel's case. All of them documented signs of abuse. None of them removed him from the home. Instead of escalating the situation, these professionals closed the case, or passed it off to someone else. Required home visits were skipped. Injuries were dismissed as accidents. Gabriel's file grew longer, but the action taken grew colder. Every cry for help was noted on paper, and ignored in reality. Gabriel Fernandez was a little boy surrounded by people who saw his pain and chose silence over action. And by the time anyone realized the severity of his suffering, it was far too late. It was the evening of May 22, 2013, when a desperate 911 call came in from the Fernandez residence in Palmdale, California. On the line was Pearl Fernandez, Gabriel's mother, claiming that her 8-year-old son had fallen and hit his head on a dresser. Her voice was shaky but emotionless. She said it was an accident. But what paramedics would discover inside that apartment was no accident, it was a house of horror. When first responders arrived, they found Gabriel lying unconscious, limp and barely breathing. He was on the bedroom floor, naked, battered, and gasping for air. He had multiple bruises, open wounds, and visible burns on his body. His skin was mottled and discolored. There were shocking signs of prolonged abuse, not just one injury, but dozens. His skull was fractured in multiple places. He had 3 broken ribs, burns on his skin, and missing patches of hair. As the medics tried to resuscitate him, they noticed that his groin and lungs had been pierced by metal BB pellets, still embedded beneath the skin. It was immediately clear, Gabriel had not fallen. He had been brutally tortured. He was rushed to Children's Hospital Los Angeles, placed on life support, and immediately prepped for emergency surgery. But the damage was too extensive. Doctors were horrified. The attending physicians and trauma specialists, many of whom had decades of experience, said it was the worst case of child abuse they had ever seen. Gabriel's brain had swollen so severely from the head trauma that he was declared brain dead within 48 hours. For 2 days, he lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines. His body, though young, had been pushed beyond the limit of what any human could survive. On May 24, 2013, Gabriel was officially pronounced dead. He was 8 years old. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted a detailed autopsy and later ruled his death a homicide, caused by blunt force trauma combined with neglect and malnutrition. The final report listed multiple injuries, too many to count, some of them recent, many of them older, showing a long and horrifying pattern of sustained torture. It became evident that Gabriel had been beaten daily, possibly multiple times a day, for months. News of his death spread rapidly. What began as a local tragedy quickly turned into a national outrage. People across California, and the entire United States, were stunned. How could an 8-year-old boy, who had repeatedly shown signs of abuse, been left to die in a home full of violence and hate? Gabriel's school had reported the signs. Teachers had made calls. Neighbors had heard his screams. Social workers had visited. And yet, no one intervened in time. In the days that followed, protests broke out across Los Angeles County, especially in front of the offices of the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. Candles, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes were placed at makeshift memorials. The community cried out for justice, not just for Gabriel, but for every child who had ever been failed by the system. The story of Gabriel Fernandez became more than just another case of child abuse. It became a national symbol of institutional failure. Americans demanded answers. Who was responsible? Why were the warning signs ignored? Why were 4 trained social workers unable, or unwilling, to remove Gabriel from a home that was clearly unsafe? And most haunting of all, how many more children were suffering in silence, just like Gabriel, unseen and unprotected? Following Gabriel's death on May 24, 2013, the wheels of justice began to turn, quickly, and with intensity. The horrifying injuries revealed in his autopsy left no doubt that this was not a tragic accident, but a premeditated and prolonged campaign of torture. Just days after Gabriel's death, his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre, were arrested. Both were charged with first-degree murder, with the added special circumstance of torture, a charge that made them eligible for the death penalty. Prosecutors described the case as one of the most disturbing acts of child abuse ever seen in California's history. Isauro Aguirre's trial began in September 2017, nearly 4 years after Gabriel's death, in a packed Los Angeles courtroom. The public and press followed the case closely, and tensions were high. The level of cruelty described during testimony was almost too much to bear. Photographs of Gabriel's broken body were shown to the jury. They revealed bruises, cigarette burns, BB gun wounds, fractured bones, and ligature marks. The paramedic who responded to the 911 call, a seasoned professional with years of trauma experience, broke down in tears on the witness stand. He admitted that nothing in his career had prepared him for what he saw that night, the body of an 8-year-old child so beaten and broken it barely looked human. The prosecution portrayed Aguirre as a sadistic monster, a man who inflicted suffering on a child daily, without remorse, and often with deliberate psychological torment. They emphasized the systematic nature of the abuse and argued that Aguirre specifically targeted Gabriel because he believed the child was gay. Witnesses testified that Aguirre called Gabriel homophobic slurs, made him wear girls' clothing to school, and seemed to enjoy humiliating him. Aguirre's defense team attempted to mitigate the horror by suggesting that he had snapped under pressure. That the stress of raising 3 children, combined with Pearl's behavior, led him to act irrationally. But the evidence left little room for doubt. This was not a moment of lost temper. It was months of planned, cold, and escalating torture. Expert witnesses and forensic analysts dismantled the defense's narrative. The jury saw through it. On November 15, 2017, after weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury found Isauro Aguirre guilty of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of torture. The verdict carried a death sentence recommendation, which the judge upheld in December 2017. Aguirre was sentenced to death and was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he remains on death row. As for Pearl Fernandez, her legal team saw the overwhelming evidence stacking up and opted for a plea deal. In February 2018, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and admitted to her role in Gabriel's death. By doing so, she avoided the death penalty, but received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, she offered a brief apology to the court, but many believed it was too little, too late. She is now serving her sentence at a California women's facility. But the courtroom saga didn't end with Pearl and Aguirre. In a rare and unprecedented move, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against 4 social workers: Stephanie Rodriguez, Patricia Clement, Kevin Bohm, and Gregory Merritt. These were the professionals tasked with protecting children like Gabriel, and they had failed catastrophically. They were charged with felony child abuse and falsifying public records, based on allegations that they ignored warning signs, filed inaccurate reports, and allowed Gabriel to remain in a home where his life was clearly in danger. Their arrests marked one of the few times in U.S. history that social workers were held criminally accountable in a child death case. It sent shockwaves through the child welfare community. However, after several years of legal battles, in 2020, a California appellate court dismissed all charges against the social workers, ruling that their failures, while grave, did not rise to the level of criminal conduct under existing law. Still, the public outrage never faded. For many, these workers were part of a broken system, one that saw the bruises, heard the cries, and still turned away. Gabriel's case became more than a tragedy. It became a national reckoning. It forced the public to ask, when those in power fail to act, who protects the most vulnerable among us? The trial of Isauro Aguirre began in October 2017, drawing massive public and media attention. By now, Gabriel Fernandez's name had become synonymous with one of the most horrific cases of child abuse in U.S. history. Emotions were raw. The community demanded accountability, not just from Gabriel's abusers, but from every level of the system that failed him. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution laid out its case with disturbing clarity. Aguirre was described as a sadistic and calculating abuser, someone who had tortured an 8-year-old boy over a period of months, not in a fit of rage, but with consistent, cold-blooded cruelty. The jury was shown graphic photographs of Gabriel's injuries: cigarette burns, BB gun wounds, bruises covering his body, and signs of starvation. Witness after witness broke down in tears as they recounted what Gabriel had endured. One of the most heart-wrenching testimonies came from Gabriel's teacher, Jennifer Garcia, who had been reporting signs of abuse for months. She spoke about how Gabriel once asked her, "Is it normal for moms to hit their kids?" She told the jury how she had reached out repeatedly to authorities, but no one came to save him. Paramedics who responded to the 911 call testified next. One recalled how Gabriel's tiny body looked more like a car accident victim than a child. They were seasoned professionals, but nothing had prepared them for what they witnessed that night. Jurors wept. Courtroom spectators turned away. No one who sat through the trial remained unaffected. After weeks of devastating evidence and emotional testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. Isauro Aguirre was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture. In December 2017, he was formally sentenced to death, a rare outcome in modern child abuse cases. Aguirre now resides on death row at San Quentin State Prison, awaiting execution. Pearl Fernandez, perhaps fearing the same outcome, took a plea deal. In February 2018, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The court sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, she gave a short, unemotional apology. To many, it felt hollow, a last attempt at mercy from a mother who had shown her son none. But even as the courtroom doors closed, the story was far from over. The outrage surrounding Gabriel's death ignited a much larger conversation, one not just about parental cruelty, but about systemic negligence. How did so many adults, Teachers, social workers, sheriff's deputies, counselors, see the signs, report them, and still fail to protect Gabriel,